thank you for joining us. For those of you that don't know me by now, I'm Shilpa Bari. I'm class of 1999, and I chair the reunion committee. I'm going to take that as you're all having a good time. Yeah. My classic line is that if there's any complaints, you come to me, but if you have a good time, tell the entire team, because there's a big team that goes into making this happen, so do that. On to our panel. Over the past few months, the country has seen a resurgence in Americans making their voices heard, not only through marches and protests, but also through grassroots organizing both in person and online. And although protesting is the new brunch, as you may have seen on a t-shirt recently, activism isn't merely a fad. It's been going on in America for decades, and it isn't going anywhere anytime soon. With that in mind, we've put together a multi-generational panel featuring just a few of the many Barnard alumnae who have spent their lives in the fields of government and social justice to discuss their respective careers and perspectives on what the past, present, and future look like for activism. The panel is moderated by Deborah Feyerick, a Barnard 1987 alumna who is a CNN national correspondent and also celebrating a milestone reunion this year. Deborah.
And by milestone, she says, you can do the math yourself, because I'm not saying it out loud. Anyway, it's amazing just how quickly time flies, and we're talking about the number of years that have passed. I want to introduce this incredibly distinguished panel, each of whom has done incredible work in their areas of expertise. And they may not have known that it was going to become an area of expertise, but it is now. And so I think we are stronger for it. So in order of class, let me introduce Mila Jasey, class of 72, celebrating her 45th year reunion. She is an Assemblywoman from New Jersey in the New Jersey State Legislature, and her focus is on education and housing, and those are her areas of passion. To my immediate right is Vernā Meyers, class of 82. And that means she is celebrating her 35th anniversary.
You do the numbers on me. But
I know.
All right.
God, that's so wrong. All right, I'm celebrating my 30th. And Vernā was a Harvard-trained lawyer who decided that working in a law firm was not her thing, and she is now focused on fixing discrimination and bias in the workplace, bias that we may not even know that we have, like saying a number or not saying a number, but okay. Small, exactly. It happens with its microaggression, as my daughter would tell me. So we have Erika Bernabei, class of 02. She's celebrating her 50th anniversary. And she is founder of Equity and Results, and she too is fighting for equity and parity in the workplace. So, and I think we have a phone going, or an angel coming. I think an angel just got its wings. All right. Yeah, and so if we could turn off the phone, just, which I should have done as well. Now that you mention it. All right. Okay, and our final and youngest panelist here is Amee Wrzburg, class of 12, which means she's only celebrating her 5th college reunion. And she is an anti-violence activist and represents the LGBTQ community in trying to make a difference in understanding violence against the community, which is very simplistic, and you'll explain it further in just a moment. But the first thing I'm going to do is, since each of you have a great voice and can represent yourselves better than I could possibly do, I'm going to have you introduce what you do and how activism is part of the mission that you represent. And I'm going to start with Vernā.
Thank you. I think this was happening. Okay, great. So I would say in a nutshell that what I'm doing
It's working, yeah. Good.
is helping people to understand why all of us will benefit if we can create the kinds of environments where everyone of every background feels respected. They feel expected to be amazing, right? Expected to be there. And they feel that they are respected in the ways in which they are addressed in their opportunities. And in particular, they feel reflected. You know, and whether it's sort of how the place looks or how it runs or what the norms are, those that are spoken and unspoken. But basically, I'm well known for a quote that says that diversity is being invited to the party, but inclusion is being asked to dance. And it's really about getting the dance on for so many people who have been marginalized in companies and communities and in this world. So that's my small job, but I love it to death, and I think I love it because it is full of so much joy and curiosity and innovation when people actually see it and believe it.
All right, so overcoming biases and understanding those biases to begin with. All right, so Mila.
Well, first of all, it's great to be back. I've been coming back every 5 years since my 10th reunion. And I encourage all of you to continue to come and get your classmates to come, because it really, it's hard to explain, but it kind of renews one's faith in oneself and in women. So currently what I'm doing is I'm serving in the state legislature. This is my 10th year. I'm running again. It's every 2 years. And why do I do it? My husband asks me that all the time. But I do it because I realize that even though the past 7 years in New Jersey we haven't been able to go forward, it's still very important that our voices be heard. And I have great hope that with a change in administration, the work that has been pent up for the last 7 years, particularly in affordable housing, and by that we mean housing that people can afford to rent or live in, right? That's everyone from your kids when they're coming home from college and starting an entry-level job, to people with disabilities who need a group home setting perhaps, to senior citizens who don't really want to live with their children like my mom does, but cannot afford to stay in the community and live in a place that's safe and supportive. So we have a lot of work to do there. In terms of education, and one of the reasons I tie the two together is because zip code generally determines the quality of your public schools. And I am a strong advocate for public schools. I feel that our public schools are the base of our democracy. And if we don't keep them going, if we don't support them, we're going to see even worse times than what we're seeing now. So those are the two areas. And I'll just give a shout out to women. We are still way behind in terms of representation in the legislatures. And although it is frustrating, we do have our moments of victory and we are able to push programs forward. But if we're not there at the table, we're on the menu, right?
And I do just want to, off that point, which is a great point, and that is, since the inauguration, more than 13,000 women have signed up to run for some sort of public office on every level. So there's an energy that's out there, but you know, as we say, this is a moment in time that we cannot and should not squander, because in chaos there's great opportunity, and I think we can agree that it has never been more chaotic. So, that said, in class order, I'm going to go to Erika first.
So I'm an anti-racist community organizer that does work inside of systems. So what that means is this. My activism is based on the privileges that I as a white woman bring to the table and the systems I have access to. So what does that mean specifically? So it sounds a little, amorphous and a little theoretical. It means that I get invited to tables, whether it's foundation tables or public health system tables. Sometimes I'm working for the city of San Francisco, other times it's a big foundation. And my business is to make sure that racial equity, and I work in collaboration with folks of color, so that means I'm never by myself doing this work, but I'm with another person of color. It means that we believe that racial equity and anti-racism is not something you do on the side of your work. It's something that gets embedded in the institution so that you don't do anti-racist work. You're the anti-racist who does work. And so that means whether it's education, public health, whether it's the way you distribute foundation dollars, we're gonna help you build a system and measure whether you're having an impact in the communities that you serve, hope to serve, have ineffectively served forever. Systems have been reproducing racial inequities for a very long time. And so I come to the table as a white queer woman, but the work I do is actually inside of spaces that are interested and really focused on producing racial equity at a systems level. And I work, again, in collaboration and in collective with folks of color who we lead this work together. And so that's what my organization does.
Okay, Amee.
Great. So my particular issue areas are gender justice and sexual health and rights. And so I spent the last 3 years as the Sexual Violence Prevention Program Manager at UNC Chapel Hill. And so I've been overseeing a sexual violence prevention peer education program that reaches about 500 students a year. And so I guess the part I would say that is the most activist part is training peer educators and helping them learn how to talk about these issues in front of their peers, but also how to really work on changing social norms around how we look at sexual violence.
That is something that started when you first came to Barnard, right? You became a peer educator, and it was really, I think you said when we spoke that it was the first time that you had been it sort of drew you in because there was something that hadn't been addressed. What was it that drew you to this area, and what surprised you most about what you had taken for granted that in fact was very different?
Sure. So I worked in response for a few years before I kind of transitioned into prevention, and so I thought I had a good understanding of the issues, but when I switched into prevention, I realized really just how complicated all of the systems are, and then if you aren't looking at these issues from a systems level, that you're really not going to be able to make as much change as you would like. And I think I also really took away how hard it is to change cultural norms and cultural understanding. Yes. And I think as a student at Barnard, I spent a lot of time learning feminist theory, sitting in history and anthropology classes and really talking about these things, but it wasn't until I transitioned into the practice side of it and really trying to apply all of that I realized that things are often a lot more nuanced and things are often a lot harder when you're trying to do the work in practice.
So when you talk about the cultural norms, just to follow up, when you talk about the cultural norms that sort of are hard to change, what specifically did you see? What was the resistance that you met, that you tried to, or that you're trying to have an impact?
That's a great question because I think there's so many different things. I think that, especially working with college students, they've had 18 to 22 years of socialization, and it's really hard to sort of undo that in a 3 or 4 hour long training. And so, yeah, it's a big task. But so I think a lot of it is being confronted with something that seems really different. And I think that sometimes that's where a lot of that resistance comes from because it is different and it's challenging the worlds that we live in and the systems that we think we understand. And I think getting challenged, especially on just this very fundamental level, can feel really hard for people.
And one quick example.
There's just so many. I would say one article I have my peer educators read is this article about the phrase "you guys," and it's this really fantastic theorist, Cheryl Kleinman, who writes this article about the phrase "you guys" and what does it mean when that is the phrase that we use, and that's supposed to include all people. But what does it mean when you walk into a room with a group of women and say, "Hey, you guys," when you would not walk into a group of men and say, hey, you gals, and expect that that would transfer the same way. And I think it's it's a term we all use. I think it's very ingrained in our language, but there's a lot of deeper things to it. And so I have my peer educators read that piece, and we spend a lot of time talking about language and why trying to make small shifts in our language can really help challenge a lot of bigger things. But I think changing our language is really hard, and it doesn't always feel maybe as important as other things, but I think that changing our language and modeling that can go a really long way in shifting some culture norms.
Okay. And you mentioned something, and I want to, Erika had discussed this when we spoke, and that is when you were here at Barnard, one of the things that you learned was systems, how systems work. Help us understand the systems and the structures and the climate that creates within the world of activism and change.
So systems, I mean, when you think about the systems and how they've been created in just the context of the United States, so let's just stay national for the time being, the way that systems have been constructed has produced the results we see in the world. It's not unintentional, right? These are systems that were created hundreds and hundreds of years ago, and we can see through the data that folks of color, low-income folks, and specifically low-income folks of color, are faring much worse. And so at Barnard, I began a journey of understanding history. And once you understand your history, you can then understand sort of the different kinds of production that comes from that history. Some of those systems have really, for example, the education system was set up to some extent to, although it was there were parts of the education history that were about it being democratic, it excluded folks of color for a really long time. And now we see that folks of color, for lots of different reasons, are also, the productions that the systems are creating are actually producing those same inequities, be they unintentional or intentional. So Barnard gave me a very important historical context and a theoretical context, but it wasn't until I went into the world and began to do work with people and build off of the assets and the privileges that I had that the systems became real. So now the job is to disrupt those systems. Some people disrupt them from the outside, and some people disrupt them from the inside, and I'm an insider, so that's how I think about that.
And Vernā, you came to Barnard, and then you went to Harvard. You had two very, very different experiences with systems, and then going into the world of law. So talk to me about how those shaped your thinking and how it led you to do something where you felt you could take back control.
Well, what I think I learned, and it's funny because you said you learned it in class. I learned it on this campus trying to make some space for black people. And some of my sisters are out here in the audience. BOBW, I was the head of the Black Student Organization. That's where I got slapped in the face with systems, because you have what appear to be neutral systems, who gets what money, how much money they get, where they can have a party, where they can't have a party, what kind of party they can have, and so forth. And you start going, wait a minute, I don't understand, because they're having a party and they got all that money, and why aren't we getting, right? And so there were all these embedded notions about how we should behave, and in particular, there's so few people of color on this campus that you just didn't have the weight. And then somehow we were invisible in many cases to administration, and so we were always like pressing and trying to get opportunities and so forth. That's where I got introduced to systems. Before that, I just thought I was Vernā. I didn't even know there was racism. It was I came out of Baltimore, like everybody I knew was black for the most part. Black was not a special identity for me. Right? Whatever. I had gone to mixed race high school, but when I got here is where I really noticed racism, and I was mad. I was kind of mad at my folks. I was like, hey, y'all didn't want to tell me that there was still racism. That's right.
I was going to find out.
Exactly. I think they were just like, you can do whatever you want, honey. Go on, do it. And it's true, you can, but you have to really navigate systems. So one of the things that I learned when I went to Harvard is I went to Harvard to change the world. Right? And you're like, oh no, this is how you keep the world the same. This is, right? This is all status quo. This is how we keep it the same. And then I was like, I'm in criminal justice, criminal procedure. I would come home and cry because I was reading the cases. And the cases were just constantly about which black guy is going to get railroaded by the police and the jury. So I said, well, I'm going to do something that matters. And so I started doing housing clinic, because you can do that as a student. You can go and help people. But then you're like, wait, I'm just preventing them from getting evicted this week. Yeah. But like, I'm going to have to come back next week. So you start seeing the overall big system. And you're like, how does doing this one thing, even creating sort of a process to try to actually help these people survive? They're still surviving a daily thing versus shifting fundamentally the systems that have created this marginalization. So then I was like, but now you're broke and you owe a lot of money. So, right? Now you have actually amassed an enormous amount of debt. And so maybe we need to stop being theoretical and figure out how we can pay these bills. And so I then took a job in a law firm. And in that law firm, because I also didn't want to just be someone talking off the top of my head, I really wanted to know, like, what is true? What is real about the corporate world? What do people care about? Because I was making them out to be a big, bad thing. I wanted to know what I was talking about. And I went into an environment where I was the first and only black person they'd ever had in this law firm. And I felt like it's 1985 and I'm breaking the color line. Okay, so Boston, love it. But I love Boston. No, I'm not dogging Boston. It has its issues. But one of the things that I learned there is that it was not the right place for me. And I told you this on the phone. I don't have anything against people who are doing that work. It's just that was not what I was made for. Like, people died for me and sacrificed for me to get here. I got to figure out what the right use of me is. Right? The right use of me is not doing the thing that the average person has dreamed their whole life to do, because it doesn't. I was helping wealthy people get wealthier. I don't think that's a terrible thing. It just wasn't the best use of me. So, but I have to tell you one thing about systems that I totally noticed, and I want to just give my Barnard and my Harvard folks, it's a great joy to be from this school, and there is great privilege that comes from this school. And I realized this, and I thought about you. I was going to go buy a house, looking for a house at Newton. Yes, lovely Newton. I loved Newton. But it's an affluent community. It was a Saturday. I was going to meet the realtor. I was like, getting dressed, whatever, trying to find what I was going to wear. And I put a hat on my head, and I looked at myself in the mirror, and my hat was my Harvard Law School hat. I don't even wear hats. But I kept that hat on. Right? Because I'm like, you don't need to be afraid of me. You see, I am a black person who went to Harvard. In other words, I'm using my Harvard privilege to offset my skin disadvantage. And it's not because I'm paranoid. I know all the laws. I know all the studies. I know that as soon as I move into a neighborhood, people start moving out for fear that I am going to depress the value of their houses. I will have to pay harder, pay more, show more evidence that I'm capable of paying, even though my counterparts with the exact same salary, the same whatever background will not have to do as much if their skin is different. So these are not things I'm making up. So I noticed unconsciously me doing this thing, which is using my privilege. And so, you know what? There are some really wonderful things about having this opportunity. And what I want to do is use the opportunity to make it better for other folks.
Oh, so actually, and a follow-up on that, Vernā, just before we hand the mic over to Mila, and that is, you talk about overcoming these biases. You also said when you got here to Barnard and you were studying history, all of a sudden you realized that the history that was in the books, and this is, again, back in, when did you graduate? Yeah.
80s. In the 80s.
So when you were there, it was almost as if the history that you were reading about was not the history that you knew within your community of color, and yet that was the one that even then was being taught. So what did you see, and do you think the history is now being rewritten in a way that will perhaps for Amee's generation or for my children's generation be different, and this whole kind of, it will at least, if soften
Yeah.
how we see color.
Yeah.
If not totally change it. We may need a couple more generations, given the systems and the institutions. But
Okay. Yeah, sure. I'm just noticing how emotional I am, and I don't even know what that's about. Like, I mean, I guess I'm reliving. I'm home,
Exactly.
and I'm
You're
reliving,
safe.
but yeah, I had to drop out of my U.S. history class. I couldn't go. I kept watching, and I was like, okay, at some point, they're going to talk about black people. At some point, they're going to talk about Latinos. At some point, they're going to talk about Native Americans. Never. Wait, the black people showed up in slavery, and then we were rioting. That is basically what the history was. No mention of Harlem Renaissance. No mention of poets and writers and people and roles played at the World War I. It was just obviously just a white folks' war, according to the way I was taught. So I actually have to withdraw. You know that period where you just got to make the decision. Are you going to withdraw or are you going to try to catch up? I couldn't. I was like, let's just withdraw because I can't do this. However, this is the same institution where I went into the bookstore. And I was like, holy cow, it's a whole section on African American history. I'm like, what? We write books? I mean, I again was like, how has this been kept from me? But I discovered so much, because that's the awesome thing about college, is that you can take control over what you are learning and you can make choices. So all of a sudden I started seeing classes that I could take at Columbia. I'm at Cornell West over at Union, talking about, the kind of protest religion. I started taking all sorts of classes. And so I went to go see Sonia Sanchez do poetry. We invited Dick Gregory to come. I mean, it became a world that was open to me, but not if I had just followed sort of like the cores or whatever. So, but that's about college. You get the core and then you get to do whatever. And so it was really, really powerful. And yes, I see something completely different. I see, first of all, like we went to the alumni women of color dinner on Thursday night. It was awesome. Now those girls are sassy, and they already know, like kids know now. I mean, and young people know that there is just so much talent in every group, and they have more access to it. And I think it is being integrated. And I know that the diversity initiative that Barnard is undertaking is supposed to look at those issues as well. There's a lot of space that we need to cover, but I see difference, and I believe that people are getting more understanding of that talent comes in every kind of package imaginable.
I'm going to follow up on that later, but I want to ask Mila a question. And your starting point is, where were you during your noon philosophy classes when you were here at Barnard?
We had a long conversation on the phone, so she has a lot of inside information. First of all, I want to say the message of me. I love that phrase. I really do like that phrase. I'm going to have to figure out how to put it in my vocabulary. And because words do matter. Language matters tremendously. And as I'm watching my grandchildren grow up, I'm noticing there's a different language that their parents are using with them, which I really appreciate. And we're all more conscious about the words we use. So, yeah, I took philosophy, I think it was in the fall of '68. If you think back to what it was like in '68, and the big mistake I made was I took a class that met at noon. And the problem with that was all the rallies at the Sundial were at noon. And so I missed most of the class. And I didn't withdraw. And but I wrote, in my blue book, I wrote a 3-hour apology to my professor and explained what I had been doing. And I was very, very lucky because he was a young professor and he got it. He understood, suggested that I not sign up for 12 o'clock classes again, and he did pass me.
And to give it even a little bit more context, this was during the Vietnam War,
Yeah.
obviously. Colleges across New York were protesting. And Mila, your class was one of, your class actually had the greatest number of women of color at the time. And you know, when I was expecting you to tell me this number, like I was holding my breath, and it actually even seemed low to me, but to you it was high. How many women of color were there, and how did you come together as a group then when there were so many issues that were going on?
So I'm going to ask Frances, who's sitting right in front of me. It was under 50. It was just under 50. Yeah.
You guys had 28.
28.
So that's even lower than I thought. Okay.
Well, I think if you add it on, yeah.
So there were like 12 in the classes before us, but our class was the first class that had like not a multiple of 4.
Okay.
Yeah. It was, and many, yes?
We had 25.
25.
All right.
And many of our classmates did not finish didn't finish here, finished in other schools because it was just too difficult. And I'm happy to say that things have changed, but it has to be intentional. I also took, I was an American Studies major, and I wasn't happy with my classes either and ended up minoring in African Studies so that I could go to Columbia, mainly to the School of General Studies, and I took a lot of classes there, especially at night, because I was more of a night person. And that's how I fulfilled my language requirement. I took Swahili. Because it was offered. It's a beautiful language. It's a very simple language because it grew up as a trade language. And I had started out taking Russian my freshman year, and that was a huge mistake because I thought I was going to go into the diplomatic service or something. So I took, and I couldn't do Latin, which had been my high school language because I didn't have it my senior year. And Spanish, forget it. Everybody spoke fluent Spanish. But Swahili, we were all on the same level. We were all beginners, and it was a lot of fun.
Tell me how, go ahead, Amee.
I'm just laughing because I studied Swahili for 3 years here. So